In this talk, I would like to explore the mysterious force that shapes our reality, what the Buddha called mental formations. These elusive entities, comprising our thoughts, emotions, and intentions, hold the key to self-discovery and the path to leading a fulfilling life. But beware, as not all mental formations are equal. It's time to learn to discern the wholesome from the unwholesome and to shatter the illusion that these formations represent our true self. So yes, I want to explore the aggregate that the Buddha called mental formations and look at how they play a role in our lives. As I said, mental formations refer to our thoughts, emotions, and intentions, and they definitely shape the way we see ourselves, the world, and how we interact in it. Let's look at thoughts first. We are mostly unaware of our thoughts as they arise in the mind moment by moment. We often go through our days on autopilot and we're unconscious of our thoughts. In this state, thoughts just jump in and off we go, carried away by them. If we are meditative practitioners, then at some point we realize that I've been lost in thought. We wake up from being lost in thinking. In this entire process, there's a very strong sense of a self that is thinking. To experience no self, we practice being aware of thoughts as they occur. We start to see and experience thoughts as objects arising and passing, just as sounds do. We start to see them like clouds floating through the sky. We start to see the selfless and impersonal nature of our thoughts. Here's an exercise that Joseph Goldstein suggests. Imagine that every thought that arises in your mind is coming from the person next to you. Just notice if that would make a difference in how you're relating to the thought. It can give you a sense that the identification with the thought is extra. The thought is appearing and disappearing like a sound does, but being identified with it is something that we're adding extra. So what is a thought? What basically does a thought comprise? When the mind is thinking, we can simply ask the question, what is a thought? We're not looking at the content of the thought, but rather just seeing the direct experience of the process of thinking. You can do this right now. Simply pause in this moment. Look and see thoughts happening. You can see that it is very fleeting and ephemeral, kind of like bubbles forming and dissipating. What if we viewed thoughts in this way all the time? Would they affect us in the same way? It is important to remember that thoughts are not a problem. It is simply the mind doing what all minds do, produce thoughts. They arise and pass away. They only cause us problems when they are believed to be true and assumed to present and represent who we are. One way to relate to thoughts and emotions is to see them as clouds floating through the sky. The teaching is to disengage from the ego and be the witness instead. We're not identifying with the ego, and instead we're identifying with the witness or the observer. When we see thoughts from the perspective of the witness, we're less likely to be pulled into them, into the drama of them. Another exercise I like to practice is seeing thoughts like a movie. When watching a movie, we get wrapped up in the story, right? Feeling a variety of emotions. We might be thrilled or frightened or in love. At any moment, we can pause and go, hey, these are just pixels of light projected on a screen. Everything that I thought was happening is not really happening. It's the same way with our thoughts. We get caught up in the story, in the drama, forgetting their essential, insubstantial, and fleeting nature. When we see the true nature of thoughts, we have the power to choose which thoughts are helpful and which are harmful. We act on the helpful thoughts, and we can more easily let go of the harmful thoughts. This is what discerning is all about. Here's a story to illustrate the point. It's about Bob's relationship to thoughts. Bob, who had been practicing meditation for a few years, heard about the importance of relating to thoughts in a non-judgmental way, but found it was difficult to get because he got pulled into the thinking mind. One day Bob was sitting in meditation when a stream of thoughts began to flood his mind. He found himself getting caught up in the thoughts and becoming increasingly frustrated and agitated. He began to judge himself for not being able to focus and concentrate, and found that this only made the thoughts stronger. Just then, Bob remembered words from his meditation teacher, who had told him to think of thoughts as clouds passing through the sky. He imagined that he was sitting on a mountain, looking at the sky, and that each thought was a cloud passing through. As he did this, he could eventually see that the clouds just came and went. And when they were not there, he could see that they're not permanent. He realized that he did not have to get caught up in the clouds, but could simply observe them passing by. He allowed each thought to come and go without judgment, without trying to hold on to them, or without pushing them away. From that day on, Bob continued to use the image of the clouds passing through the sky to help him relate to thoughts in a kind of non-judgmental way during his meditation. And he found that the more he practiced this, the more he was able to find inner peace and clarity, even when a busy mind came up and happened. Okay, now let's look at the next mental formation, the volition or intention. It's fundamentally important. In fact, it's so important that some people exclusively talk about volition when discussing the aggregate mental formation. It basically refers to the underlying motivations and intentions that drive our actions and thoughts. So the aggregate of volition is closely related to the concept of karma, as our actions and thoughts are driven by our intentions. Our intentions can be either wholesome or unwholesome, and our actions and thoughts will reflect this. So, of course, wholesome intentions lead to positive thoughts and actions, and unwholesome intentions will lead to negative thoughts and actions. To understand volition and how it refers or relates to our actions and thoughts, it is important to understand the three roots of unwholesome volition. And these you've probably heard are greed, hatred, and delusion, the three poisons according to the Buddha. Greed is also known as attachment. It's the desire for material possessions or pleasure. Hatred is known as aversion. It's a feeling of anger or the pushing away of things. And delusion is also known as ignorance. It's the lack of understanding or knowledge about the true nature of reality and ourselves. These three roots of unwholesome volition are the source of all negative actions and thoughts. The Buddha taught that by understanding and recognizing these roots of unwholesome volition, we could begin to transform them and develop wholesome intentions and motivations. So by being aware of intentions, we can recognize when they're rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion. Even once we have seen the impersonal nature of other mental factors, such as thoughts and emotions, we can easily continue to identify with intention. Intention can often be the subtle hideout for a sense of self. So one way to practice and notice intention is to be aware before an event occurs. For example, before the body moves, get a sense of the intention to move. The thought to move is not the intention. Intention shows up as a feeling or kind of an impulse, a kind of gathering of energy in the mind. Joseph Goldstein calls it the about to moment. A teacher once asked me to practice with intention while I was engaging in walking meditation. In walking meditation, one simply walks back and forth in a pre-established distance in a set lane, often with awareness on sensations in the body or the breath. My teacher asked me to pause when I got to the end of my walking lane and notice any intention to turn or move in any way. I could clearly see a kind of energy or urge to turn, say, to the left. Then after a few seconds, it would change to an urge to turn to the right. For hours, I simply stood and observed intention move this way and that way. I could really see that intention was happening without a self directing it in any way. I had the clear realization that these intentions were not a fixed part of a self, but were constantly changing and dependent on various unknown causes. After the walking meditation, I began to reflect on how intentions are so quick and small, but carry such a huge power. Let's finally look at the mental formation aggregate called emotions. As you probably know, it's important to be aware of emotional states because they really shape how we see the world, how we interact with the world and other people. We often identify with our emotions and solidify a sense of a separate self around it. People have been trying to avoid troublesome emotions and mind states throughout history. It's our natural inclination to try to avoid or suppress or get rid of painful emotions. But a new way can be practiced and learned that is both healing and liberating. Over time, we learn that avoiding or suppressing difficult emotions just bring more pain. We've heard, and you've heard me say this many times, that what we resist persists. And as I say, I would take it even further and say what we resist persists and even worsens. This leads people to feel kind of stuck or confused as how to deal with difficult emotions. We try so many different things and nothing seems to work. The Buddha taught that by allowing and seeing emotions, this enables us to understand them. The way to deal with difficult emotions then is not to resist them or deny them, but rather to accept them, embrace them, and go through them. And we can only go through them once we first allow them to be just as they are. As Rumi says in the poem, The Guest House, welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows. The Buddha called difficult emotions afflictive emotions. They're basically mind states, what we call emotions, that are based on greed, ill will, and delusions. Sometimes he referred to them as unwholesome mind states. We can also refer to them as painful emotions. There's a variety of acronyms out there that specify the process to mindfully relate to difficult emotions. RAIN is probably one of the well-known ones, which refers to recognizing the emotion, accepting, investigating, and then either non-identification or nurturing. Over the years, I've come to seeing a four-step process in relating to emotions. It's a little bit different and uses the acronym REDS. R stands for recognizing that an emotion has arisen. E refers to embracing the emotion rather than resisting. And this takes it a little further than acceptance. D refers to the discernment as to whether the emotion is wholesome or unwholesome. And the S stands for seeing its impersonal nature, which is the same as non-identification. Let's look at each of these steps in more detail. For reds, R is for recognizing. Recognizing that an emotion has appeared. This is a crucial step because we can only work with an emotion if we recognize it first. We're often unconscious of our emotions. We're lost in thought, and we might miss the arising of emotion. Often we're not aware of an emotion until it's causing us some serious distress. When we're present with our moment-to-moment experience, mindfulness, we can recognize that an emotion has arisen early on before we're carried away in distress and suffering. And tension in the body is a good mindfulness bell. It's a good indicator, a reminder to look and see what's there. Usually when we look, we see that a difficult emotion is present. The second step is E, which refers to embracing the emotion. Most often we deny, avoid, or numb ourselves to difficult emotions. Over time, we may try to control the situation, and we just get stuck in replaying the emotion endlessly. I intentionally use the word embrace here rather than accept, as I feel it takes us closer to being with the emotion. We can accept an emotion, but still view it as over there. I accept that emotion over there. Embracing an emotion means that the emotion is not at a distance from us, but rather we are one with the emotion. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean wallowing in emotions or justifying them in any way. It's just simply the full acknowledgement that the emotion is here, it's accepted, the fact that it's here is accepted, and we completely embrace that it's part of our current experience. And as we'll see later, it doesn't mean that we don't act. Acceptance and embracing are not passive resignation. How do we know if we're embracing an emotion or not? Sensing struggle is a great telltale that we're not accepting the present moment as it is, that we're not embracing what is, not embracing an emotion. Struggle means that something is happening that we're not accepting, right? We're trying to change what's happening. When we embrace an emotion, we can investigate it. And as you know, this is not a discursive investigation, problem solving, using thoughts to try to figure it out. We come to see directly and know our emotions, not by thinking about them, but rather simply by dropping into ourselves and being intimate with what we find. When we do this, what is there simply reveals itself. It's an intuitive knowing rather than a rational knowing. And with this intuitive knowing, we realize that we're not our emotions. They simply arise all on their own. The third step, the D in reds, is discernment. And we're discerning whether it's a wholesome or unwholesome mind state. This one I've added, the Buddha to the acronyms. The Buddha often spoke about unwholesome mind states being centered around, as you know, greed, anger, or hatred and delusion. He referred to wholesome mind states as non-greed, non-anger, and non-delusion. So in other words, generosity, kindness, and wisdom. One way to practice with emotions is to increase the wholesome states and decrease the unwholesome states. When we practice in this way, it's important to be careful that discernment does not morph into self-judgment. For example, when anger appears, rather than judging yourself for being angry or an angry person, you simply notice that anger has appeared. And finally, the fourth step is seeing the impersonal nature of the emotion. The final step is to see that the difficult Emotions are not who we are. Here we see emotions arising, but we do not identify with them as representing our nature or who we are in that moment. They're seen as impersonal, simply arising from causes outside of our control. In a direct path to awakening, we might go directly to this step, seeing the not-self nature of emotions. Central to this step is seeing that emotions are not a problem. Having a human emotion is a natural part of being a human being. The problem isn't the emotion, it's how we deal with it. When we claim the emotion as I or me, we identify with it and we suffer. We can learn to not take emotions so personally. We can also see that they will go away because they are impermanent. The only way to make them stick around is to resist them. We can know that we are not our old hurts. If we are not identified with the emotional pain and do not construct a sense of self around it, then it simply flows through us, barely leaving a ripple. When we see that emotions are impersonal and ephemeral, we can see and accept the old pains or memories. We're not identified with the pain as my pain, and see the thoughts that feed it as just thoughts arising. They naturally dissolve and release. Painful emotions come, but become divested from a sense of self. There's a parable of the poison arrow in the Buddha's teachings, in the Sunyata Nikaya. It's a reminder that it's important to be aware of our thoughts and emotions, but not to get overly caught up in them. Instead, we focus on letting them be just as they are. In this story, in the parable, a man is struck by a poison arrow and is in great pain. His friends and family want to help him, but they don't know who shot the arrow or what kind of poison is on the arrowhead. They begin to debate and argue about these things, but the man, who is in great pain, tells them that these questions are irrelevant. What is important is that he's in pain and needs to get the arrow removed. This story is often used to illustrate the importance of understanding that our thoughts and emotions, like the poison arrow, can cause us pain and suffering. The important thing is not to get caught up in trying to understand and analyze the thoughts and emotions, but instead to take action to remove them. In the case of this story, the action would be to remove the arrow. In the case of our thoughts and emotions, the action would be to practice mindfulness and acceptance and to let go of them. I hope you found this talk helpful in giving you some insight into the aggregate of mental formations, and that this helps you on your path to healing and awakening. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you soon.